So this is a story of a girl named Kaylee. She's a 19-year-old college cheerleader, had a boyfriend named Mark. One day, they attended a music festival together and took some rave candy to enhance the experience. Things took a turn when they ran into Kaylee's ex-boyfriend. Mark could tell Kaylee still had feelings for her ex, which led to a heated argument. Their fight escalated, and eventually they left the festival, still angry, and got into Mark's Mercedes. Hours later, Mark pulled up to a hospital, honking and flashing his lights. He told the paramedics that his girlfriend wasn't breathing and needed help. When they reached Kaylee, she was mostly unclothed, covered in bruises, and unresponsive. Mark claims she overdosed, but despite doctors' attempts to resuscitate her 7 times, she was ultimately declared brain dead. Her devastated mom and stepdad, faced with an impossible decision, took her off life support. At the hospital, police questioned Mark in the chapel. He admitted they'd taken drugs, argued, and left the festival. According to Mark, they went to an empty parking lot where they engaged in consensual, rough sex, after which she supposedly overdosed. His story seemed plausible enough, so police let him go. But 3 months later, Kaylee's autopsy report revealed she hadn't died from an overdose. Instead, it showed blunt force trauma to her head and face, and her death was ruled a homicide. Mark was immediately arrested and charged with first-degree murder. 2 years later, the case went to trial. But the jury couldn't agree on a verdict, leading the judge to declare a mistrial. Kaylee's parents, certain that Mark was responsible, knew they had to prepare for the retrial. Kaylee's mom, a scientist, and her stepdad, a NASA engineer, meticulously reviewed the autopsy photos and focused on 2 specific bruises near her ears. They formed a theory that Mark had smashed Kaylee's head against the car door's lock button. Her stepdad even built a 3D model of her head to test the theory. Determined to seek justice, they tracked down Mark's old Mercedes, which he had sold years ago, and bought it back. They hired a private investigator and filmed a reenactment of the crime using actors in the actual car. Meanwhile, local media closely followed the case, and Mark didn't shy away from sharing his thoughts on social media, where he seemed nonchalant about his reputation. Years passed, and the second trial finally began. This time, the prosecution was well prepared, and after the trial, the jury deliberated carefully. They eventually returned with a verdict. Though they found Mark not guilty of murder, they did convict him of aggravated assault, which carried a maximum sentence of 20 years. While it wasn't the murder conviction Kaylee's parents had hoped for, the judge sentenced Mark to the maximum penalty. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a step, and it brought some solace to her grieving family.